we've come a long way. We've completed, I think, half of the journey, and there's another 50% remaining to go. But thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, based on your time zone and location, wherever you're located. Thank you for joining in and tuning into today's session on Dev Apex Hours. Um, Today we have an important and an interesting topic around which is the key ask for Salesforce developers, and often Salesforce developers end up doing that, which is trying to make two different systems talk to each other uh, without really trying to take the cat out of the bag. I am going to hand over the session to the captain of our ship, our speaker today, who is Jayesh. Uh, so Jayesh, over to you. But before you start, Jayesh, just a quick request for everybody who's joined in. An earnest request: please mute your mic and please do not share your webcams. It becomes difficult and disturbing for all the other attendees, and becomes difficult to focus on the session, and it deviates the speaker. So please do not share your webcam. Right. So with that, without any wait, Jayesh, the stage is yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Jigar, and thank you to Apex Hour team again for giving me this opportunity. So, all right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, guys. In our part of the world right now, it's good morning, but in your part of the world, maybe in India, it's good evening. So, thank you for joining in for the session. And as Jigar said, today's topic is integration in Salesforce. So, without much ado, let me just begin. So, just a little bit about myself. I always want to keep telling everyone I'm zero without the people who are always with me. So the Ohana has always helped me to be where I am today. It's all the family, all the companies previously I worked with, all the people I worked with, and the currently people I'm working with are helping me to grow in my career. And I'm working as a solution architect at Race Oster in London, Canada. I'm taking care of I have started this group, London Canada Nonprofit Group. I was previously leading the Pune Nonprofit Group with Arpit. Like last year became Lightning Champion in the August 19 batch, and also spoken at Jaipur Developer Fest and Apex Hours for admin when we had done last year the admin training. I've taken one session, so you can connect me on the Twitter or the LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is JsonToApex. All right, so some housekeeping rules. Just mute your mic. Yeah, keep asking questions. Definitely, the whole team is there to support with the answers, and in the end, I'll also taking questions and answer. So definitely, no questions are silly. Please keep asking. Don't be bothered, and we'll be answering all the last in the last 15 minutes. All right, so we always begin something good with by taking name of God or by some good quote. So I just want to start here with a quote of Thoreau. He says always, every human being must offer thanks at least once every day to God for having been born. So again, we should thank God for being here today for the session, for being present, for being that we were able to take in the life's blessings. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to God for giving us this opportunity. So starting with the agenda, today we're gonna cover. So it's divided into two parts. Today and tomorrow, we have. Today we're gonna talk about the web communication fundamentals. Then we have differences between JSON and XML. Then we'll understand REST. Then we'll do a call out to an external service. We'll understand HTTP request and HTTP response classes. So this is the things which we're going to cover today. So, okay, let's begin. So why integration? If we have this question always, we should always look at our phones and start questioning, okay, am I having some apps on the phone which are talking to the various platforms outside or various other platforms. Imagine like we have a platform like Salesforce, we have a platform like mobile phone, our laptop. Everything is today connected, and everything is connected because of some definitely it's not magic. There's some communications happening because of some protocols, some due to internet, and all the communication happening over HTTP. It's happening through some APIs or through some various mechanisms. So what are those mechanisms? When it comes to Salesforce, we'll understand that deeply. And any platform, if it's just created for having data and having the business logic, it would be useless if it's not being if it's not connected, if it's not talking to other platforms. So uh, uh, imagine you have Salesforce and you have your ERP, and they both are talking to each other. They're connected and they're integrated because of some APIs. So what are those APIs? Let's look at them. So when it comes to integration pieces, we have the third-party applications. If you see in the top layer, and the bottom layer belongs to now Salesforce. So the third-party applications try to interact with Salesforce using some of the SDKs which Salesforce provides, or their SDKs. They connect to Salesforce via SOAP or REST or bulk various APIs which Salesforce provides. We'll look at them as we proceed in the session. But if you see, they talk to Salesforce, and we can divide that into two parts. They try to interact with the data, or they try to interact with the business logic. So when it comes to data, they would use APIs like SOAP, REST, bulk API, Salesforce Connect, and they would send data or retrieve data from Salesforce. When Salesforce needs to wait on the data from the system, Salesforce would use streaming API. Then when it comes to the mobile SDKs or third-party adapters, they want to interact or do some logical changes. They would interact with the business logic, which is written inside Salesforce. Or Salesforce, we will write some logic inside Salesforce to call the third-party APIs using Apex callouts or outbound messaging. So all these things are small pieces inside integration. There are lot of APIs to cover. There are a lot of mechanisms to understand, and this is again a very vast topic. But we're going to focus on the most important pieces: the SOAP and the REST and JSON and XML, so that we understand the basics, and then we can go work on the advanced topics. So there are two types of integrations: inbound and outbound. As we discussed, application logics are third-party applications are trying to interact with Salesforce. That would be inbound integration, when a third-party client application wants to retrieve some data from Salesforce. Example, your ERP wants to check if that account exists in Salesforce. It would send a request to Salesforce, get some response. If it would either wait for a response, or and then Salesforce would respond back with, okay, the account exists or not, or it would just send the data to be stored in Salesforce. It's sending the order data. Okay, the order has been created in ERP, or the account has been created. Just go and decide in Salesforce. It will just send the data and it'll wait for the 200 okay response. So it's like a integration which is initiated from a third-party application interacting with Salesforce, and Salesforce sending a response. It's an inbound integration, sorry. And what is an outbound integration? Outbound integration would be where Salesforce is trying to interact with third-party applications, and it needs to retrieve some status of the order in ERP, and it would send a request to the ERP server, get the response. If it's present. If it's an asynchronous, it would maybe not wait immediately, and then the response would come after some time, and then the Salesforce know, okay, this order has been activated. So in this way, Salesforce will prepare some request, send it to a third-party application using some mechanisms, using some structured process which it would allow it to interact. And then the third-party application would send a response saying, okay, or this is what you wanted. Then, so what are the basic without these principles, or without these things, we cannot proceed with integration, is that we would always need an authentication to be done inside Salesforce, or wherever, whichever application we're trying to interact for. For integration, we need to have that authentication. So what all things come on authentication? Let's look at them before we jump on to the actual integration. So it comes to user authentication. Uh, any application trying to interact with Salesforce, if it's an inbound integration, it would need a username, password. Without that, it would be it would not be able to get the data out of the application which it's trying to interact with. Username, so we always set up an integration user. We give it a profile, we give it a policy like API only user, we keep some restrictions on the profiles, we keep some limit on the failed attempts. We always keep that the password should never expire, because that is key. And if the password expires, the integration would fail. So these are critical when it comes to user authentication. Then authorization, we would use OAuth 2.0 when interacting with Salesforce. What it is, we will definitely see in practice in the demos. But OAuth 2.0, it's just like a handshake. It would need to say so give the client secret, client keys to the application to interact with. Then it comes to data security. We need to take care of the data. What objects are being exposed in the profile to the integration user? If it doesn't need to interact with the account object, it should not be given the access. Then when it comes to network authentication, we should always look at the login hours and IP ranges from where the integration user would be interacting with Salesforce. We would always want those IP added in the trusted list. If it's coming from a particular server, we know the IP is static IP, then we could keep it in the IP address, or we know this is the company IP which always we should be trusting. So we should keep that in the Ogwai trusted IP address list. Sometimes it would require security token if it's not inside the trusted IP range. So that is what we need to supply to the integration user. So, and we need to make sure the profile is meeting all the needs, whatever objects, whatever data it needs to access. It should, that provision should be done in the integration user's profile for the interaction to happen. So also we need to take care some basics that Apex ignores security if it's not classes are not written properly without sharing or with sharing. Then it would if it's without sharing, then it would ignore the security, and it would be able to access all the data even if the integration user doesn't have the access. So we need to take care of that. Then session timeouts, we have a setting in the setup that we have to go and turn it, go and change it, whatever session timeouts you need. So because there's a token which is sent and how long you want the token to be active. So that is taken care of in the connected app and the session settings. So definitely every interaction needs to be secure. If it's data, it needs to be secure, and Salesforce has that trust factor that any data which is inside, it will always be secure. And they are doing a lot of changes to their various APIs. In Spring 20, they came up with so many changes for community users, for guest users, and all that. It's because they want to keep the data secure. They don't want anyone to access data inside Salesforce, because there are various big banks or companies trusting Salesforce for the data security. So definitely and when it comes to integration, it uses HTTPS, and its SSL certificate is needed to be interacting with Salesforce. When it comes to outbound, it's a two-way SSL. Then there are port restrictions that we can only interact over 80.443 or 1024 to 66,535. We need to also have the remote site settings set. What is remote site setting? We'll see in the demo also. If remote site settings are not set, then we're not able to talk with any external websites. So let's begin with the again the basics of how APIs interact. APIs would have some mechanism, and those mechanism would contain some messages would contain either they would be written in the form of JSON or XML. So let's learn about JSON and XML first, then we'll jump onto the APIs. So what is JSON? People who are new, again, it's a JavaScript object notation. It's a form of a message which is used to interact over HTTP, and while interacting over the APIs with the APIs. It is recommended for low processing devices like mobile phones or mobile SDK. Salesforce mobile SDK or any mobile SDK would use JSON as sending messages to any application which is interacting with, instead of XML, because it's lightweight and it can handle the load, and it's easy to interpret. Again, it's independent of representation of objects. It's text-based. You can read it. You can see the example in front of you. It's it contains key value pair. So the key would be the on the left-hand side, we have the key first name, and the value is apex. And again, last name is the key, and then the value is hours. So it's a key value pair structured format, which would contain the messages which we need to send to the third-party system. So it's every language has parsers. Even Salesforce has parser to parse JSON, and it can be transmitted over HTTPS, as already said. So how do we? So when we are calling the outbound API or any third-party API, we would be getting the response in terms of JSON, or they would be expecting the request body in terms of JSON. So we would have this JSON, but how would we generate JSON inside Salesforce? How would we interpret JSON inside Salesforce? It's all through Apex, and Apex, we would write Apex class or a wrapper class, and then it would be deserialized using the JSON classes. So let's imagine we have a JSON string. This is how the JSON string looks, and how it would be represented in terms of Apex class. If you can see here, I have imagine this is the JSON for a student object, and then I would create a student class for it, and I would keep two strings variables, which is first name and last name. Then I would if it is a string, then I would deserialize it in the student using the JSON.deserialize method, and using the student class, and it would be converted into a student class, and then I can access st.firstname, st.lastname variables, and I can use that in my business logic. So again, we would see that in action in a couple of minutes. Let's look at the demo. So I will show you a sample JSON which I have got when I'm interacting with a YouTube Google API or a YouTube API, and how do we understand JSON in more details, and how do we convert it into Apex? What are the tools available? So let's look at those demos now. So let me just quickly go to a JSON. So I have a API. This is a call which I have sent using my API key to YouTube, and I have sent a particular channel ID, and the channel ID belongs to Apex Hours. So Apex Hours YouTube channel, you would know. I have sent the channel ID to YouTube API, and it has responded me with the statistics which I needed. How many view counts, how many subscriber count we have. Let me just refresh and see. Okay, yeah. So just a couple of minutes back, it was 8090. Now it's 8110. So if you see now, the subscriber count would be on Apex Hours would be 8110. So this is what it has responded me. The JSON has, this is a JSON. So now how would I interpret this inside Salesforce? Let's first understand what it contains before we take a call. Let me just use a editor. So this is a JSON editor online.org website, which will help me to just understand my JSON, and we'll come to know what are the objects, what are the key principles inside the JSON. So imagine this is a response. So this is one, and it contains a curly bracket. So we would consider as one object, and that object has various child items. So what are the child items? We have snippet, content details, statistics. But we're not interested in all that. We're interested in only specific things, the statistics which it returns. So let's look at that. So it has a object called statistics, and then in the curly bracket, inside that curly bracket, we have all the key value pairs given properly, and we could see here. So now we understand we have interest in this. So we need to get it out in get this data somehow when we are calling this API. We need this data. How would we do that? We would take this JSON and we would go to JsonToApex converter. So there's JsonToApex.herokuapp.com, this URL. I would just paste my JSON here. What it would do is you take any JSON, it would give you an Apex class out of it. You don't need to, it reduces your overload of creating a JSON class for this JSON. So I just need to click on JsonToApex, and it will create Apex code. And when I look at the zip file, it would contain the class and the test class. So I have already converted this code and put it into our Salesforce demo org. So this is the JsonToApex code which it would create. Hope you're able to see. Yeah. So this is the YouTube class. It created out of the JsonToApex Heroku app, and I have just stored just copied pasted it and put it directly in Salesforce, directly created Apex class with it. So I've named it as YouTube API class. I have it contains items as one of the list. If you saw that, it was list of items, and how we would know list, because it contains a square bracket. So it is a array. It would be in terms of array inside the JSON. So if you look at here, that's why it's list of items. And then each item would contain snippet and statistics. We discussed that. And snippet would contain all this title, description, publish that, localize, and statistics would contain these values. So this is being automatically converted for us in Apex using this tool which we use, JsonToApex. We don't have to do anything in this, but we need to definitely consume this to interpret the response which came in from the server. So if you see this, we have a parse. We need to supply the JSON in terms of string, and then it would return us the deserialized format of JSON. We would see that in the demo very soon. But this is what would happen. It is giving us the methods to parse also. So everything is there, but we are using the classes given by Salesforce, the JSON class, which has serialized and deserialized methods. So this is a JSON class which Salesforce has given, and you can read about it more on the Apex developer guide. So this JSON class contains various methods. You can create JSON, you can deserialize a JSON, you can serialize a JSON. All that can be done using this class. So there is more documentation inside this. I will show you a couple of methods and in the demo. So what did we just see is that we got a JSON from one of the APIs. When we called this API, we just called this API. It returned a JSON. This is a GET request because I was just doing getting data out of Google's API, telling me what is the statistics for the Apex hours channel, and it returned me a response. This response is nothing but a JSON, and this JSON I was able to understand, okay, what are the items inside the JSON using JSON editor online. It gave me a clear picture what I am interested in. I got to know that. Then I went to JsonToApex. I pasted that complete JSON, and I created an Apex class out of it. That Apex class, I directly put it into Salesforce, created Apex class over here, and it also gave me a test class for me to be able to deploy to production. So I was able to put in this without any issues, and I renamed this class. Instead of JsonToApex, I just called it YouTube API class. That's the only change I did. So this is how you would do it when you're doing your assignment or you're doing integration. Okay, so Coming to the presentation again. Now we saw a sample JSON, we saw the JSON editor, then we saw the JsonToApex converter. Let's understand what's there inside XML. XML is nothing but stands for extensible markup language. It's like HTML. It has a start tag, end tag, but it's something, the tags which are not defined. You have form tags and HTML tags defined, but here in XML you need to define your own tags. You need to write the schema and everything. So you need to define your customized tags, and it's structured, easy to read and write again. If you see here, the XML example, we have a student XML, but it has a starting tag of student and ending tag of student. So we understand it's a student array. And it has a first name and last name as a start and end tag again. Elements. So these are called elements, first name elements, and their attributes inside XML. So each element contains, it's telling us, and it's sharing the data in terms of elements and attributes. So let's look at the differences between JSON and XML, where we use JSON, where it's used XML, and what are the key principles or guidelines guiding this two languages. So when it comes to JSON, it has a type. It's JavaScript object notation, full form, and it has a type like string, number, object, boolean. But when it comes to XML, it's a markup language. It's typeless, and it always is string. It is a way of representing objects, which I showed you, like a student object. It would be inside a curly bracket, and but it's a markup language. We would use the tagging tags, the start tag, end tag, and we would represent the data items inside the tags. The retrieving value, you can easily retrieve the value from JSON. You saw that it's very easy. But when it comes to XML, it is somewhat difficult, not very difficult, but somewhat difficult to interpret and to interpret inside Salesforce. Then it does not provide any support for namespaces, but definitely XML provides namespace. You can define your own namespace, and you can define the schema in that namespace. It's less secured. When it comes to security, it's all subjective, but it's mainly authenticated again using the authentication mechanisms which I discussed. But it can be said it's less secure because it's very easy to interpret, but it's more secure because it has specific element structure. You would need to know that structure to even interpret the XML. So what are the key principles or guidelines inside JSON? It has a key, which is inside a double quotes string, which we saw. Then the value, which we saw, key would have a value. It's a key value pair. A curly bracket would represent an object, and a square bracket would represent it's an array. So if you see square brackets and separated by commas, then each is a object or an array, and we would need to get into a list if it's an array, and if it's an object, directly put into class. When it comes to XML, each is this is an element. Last name is a start tag, and last name with backward slash forward slash is a end tag. And this is an element. And definition, we write okay, access element, name is last name, type is string. Then attribute is something, it would say if it's which language, English, French, whatever, and we would write that in the English language, and the definition would be written as attribute name language, and type is string again. So you would define this somewhere. There would be a schema where you would define all these things, and then the guidelines would be, the schema would be given, or guidelines will be given to the application to understand, okay, what each element means, what is a type, and what is the attribute it's sending. So you are able to interpret. So if you understand in terms of technical, it's very very technical, and it would need you to be having a good parser to parse XML. So that's why it's little complex. But let's look at a code to code comparison. I was always talking about, it has a curly braces. It would be an object. Object is nothing but student here. And square bracket means array. So we have array of students inside the square bracket. If you see this, there are two student data over here present. And the first student's data is present here in the key value pair, which is ID, name, last name. And second student's data is ID, name, last name. So it's all separated by commas. It's all inside curly brackets. So each curly bracket is representing one particular object. Square bracket is representing array. When it comes to XML, it is inside a root element. It contains the element student array. And again, if you see the student now is start tag, end tag, each element is telling us, okay, this is the first student data and the second student data is here. And then we have ID, we have name, we have last name, and again, ID, name, last name. So that's how the student data is sent. If it's XML, it'll be sent in this way. If it's JSON, it'll be sent in this way. So hope you got the picture. If you have any doubts, we can definitely discuss in the end. So this is the basic mechanism of JSON and XML. Now we'll go to the actual integration, which is talk about the APIs. So I was talking about Salesforce. Salesforce, if it's into like a center, then it would interact with all the various APIs, a Google API, Amazon Web Services API, or SAP or QuickBooks. With each and every application, it can interact. It's extensive. It's really amazing platform that it supports all the APIs, and it's possible all through REST and SOAP API. And REST API would use JSON. SOAP API would use XML, and REST API also uses XML if sometimes needed, but REST API mainly interacts over JSON, and SOAP API uses XML. But if you need to interact with any application, you need to know the REST API of that particular application, or a SOAP API of the particular application, and you need to know in what way you should be sending the request, and in what format the response would be coming, so that you can interpret inside that in the tool. So a little bit basics about APIs. People again understand, you would have heard this for the first time, or if you already know, it's an application programming interface. It contains some set of functions and procedures which allow an application to interact or get the data out of a OS application or any other service. Okay. Then it's a set of specifications which use HTTP request messages, and it contains the structure for request and the response. And it either uses XML or JSON format. For example, Twitter's REST API allows developers to access Twitter data in the search API. So yeah, the data API and the search API gives the people the mechanisms or the methods to use the data which is inside Twitter, or to go and check the trends, what's happening inside Twitter. So we would get the Twitter API, we would know what are the formats it expects the request, and then we would get the response and what would the response format, and then we would use that into our whichever tool it's calling the Twitter API. We would see a demo very soon about the YouTube API, which I was talking about. So I was in the first slide, I told you about integration pieces. There are many APIs. Salesforce has many APIs. They are not just limited to REST and the SOAP. There are various APIs. And again, you would hear the word REST API twice, because REST and Apex REST are there because there is standard REST and the custom REST. So let's look at what all APIs are present. REST API uses REST protocol. Data format can be JSON or XML, and the communication is synchronous. Now, what is synchronous and asynchronous? If you know, synchronous would immediately expect a response, request and reply. If you send a request, it would wait for a response. If it's asynchronous, fire and forget, it would just fire the request, but it would just forget it. It would just wait on the it will not wait on the response. The response would come anytime when the server is ready to respond. So it's asynchronous. So these are the basics. There's much to asynchronous and synchronous, but in short, this is synchronous and asynchronous. So a REST API is a synchronous communication. A SOAP API is again synchronous communication. It's using protocol SOAP. It uses WSDL. What is a WSDL? We'll see that in our next session, which is tomorrow. But the data format is XML. And again, the communication is synchronous. When it comes to Chatter REST API, Chatter is using, again, the REST protocol. And Chatter is one of the application inside Salesforce. Many would know, but if it allows you to communicate inside Salesforce with the records. You can like post on the records. It's like a Facebook. You can post on the timeline like that. You can post on inside Salesforce. You can talk to anyone using Chatter. So that's how Chatter REST API would use JSON or XML again, and it's synchronous. And but photos are processed asynchronously if you're sending photos. Analytics REST API. So again, Einstein Analytics is one of the application. It uses the REST protocol. It is using JSON, and it's synchronous. Bulk API is when you're interacting with the data, when it's sending a lot of data inside Salesforce. It uses REST protocol. It's using CSV, JSON, XML, asynchronous. Metadata API, when you're talking using the metadata of Salesforce, we want to interact with the metadata, you would use metadata API. Streaming API, again, when you need to wait on for the data, then you'd use metadata API. Streaming API, streaming API. And then Apex REST API, just talk about a little bit. Apex REST API would be a custom REST API which you would create for any third-party application to interact with. Apex SOAP API, again, it's a custom web services which you will write inside Salesforce for third parties to interact with. We'll see a demo of Apex REST API and SOAP API in our next session. Again, they would use the similar data format and communication which we discussed about. We discussed inbound and outbound. Inbound, which all APIs we would use for inbound. Again, SOAP API, you can inbound interact with Salesforce using SOAP API or Apex SOAP API, REST API, or Apex REST API, or Chatter API. If it's synchronous, asynchronous is bulk API, Salesforce, or email services. You can send an email inside Salesforce. Outbound API, for outbound, we would use again, Apex REST or the SOAP callouts, and we can use mashups. Our mashups are nothing but it gives you you can get the data out of any system and store it in. You can see it in Salesforce without storing it in Salesforce. Outbound messaging is asynchronous. We would send outbound messages using workflows to any third-party ERP applications, and just send and forget. We would not wait for the response. But the good mechanism is it keeps retrying if it fails. So Salesforce has a mechanism every 24 hours. It'll keep retrying that outbound message. You should. It's a very good outbound messaging is present inside workflows. Force outcome canvas. We would create a canvas where we would bring a third-party application inside Salesforce. It's called Force outcome canvas. You should read about it more. Salesforce to Salesforce, again, outbound email. Any emails going outside Salesforce. Now it's time for REST. No, it's time to understand how REST actually works. Let's learn about it.